Hey, it's been a hot minute since we did a 50 facts video. I figured that since I just traveled to Colombia about a month ago, it only made sense to do something like this while I still have everything fresh in my head. That and we actually haven't touched South America yet. A lot of my research for this one's going to be a little different as it kind of came from being there, talking to tour guides, talking to locals when we could understand each other, and just seeing all the stuff for myself. Therefore, much of the research for this video, but not all of it, comes from there. And because of this, I will be working in some of the photos that I took myself. So with that, let's get rolling. Quindío wax is the tallest type of palm tree found in the world, found in the Andes in Colombia. These can reach up to 60 meters tall, and seeing them up against the highlands of the mountain range shows the height very well. Snowcaps, mountain peaks, and volcanoes can all be found around this region as well, which makes sense since the nation is along what's known as the Ring of Fire. The Darien Gap is the largest reason why what is called the Pan-American Highway cannot and has not been completed. This is between Colombia and Panama, which was once part of Colombia. It's roughly 100 miles long and is considered far too costly to build roads through the hostile environment. Since this shoots off as a small gap of land surrounded by oceans on either side, Colombia is the only country in South America to have coasts on both the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. The Rosario Archipelago is a chain of Colombian islands off the coast considered a national park, in order to preserve its beautiful coral reefs known as the Bernardo corals. Thanks to the crystal clear waters and temperatures, they can thrive and provide food and shelter for roughly 25% of the marine fauna in the area. Speaking of islands, only one English-speaking official region exists in Colombia, found in the chain of San Andreas, Providencia, and the Catalina Islands. Dating all the way back to the Puritan times, many actually moved to this from the Massachusetts region because of the cold weather. This is now a pretty hot spot for English-speaking tourists, which makes sense. Another island worth mentioning is the Santa Cruz del Isolet on the archipelago of San Bernardo. It's the most densely populated island in the world, and while different sources will give you a different population count, it is around the 500 mark on only 3 acres. Colombia is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, containing 10% of the world's biodiversity. Owing to the vast amount of different climates and landscapes, you can essentially break the country up into 5 regions. Those would be the Caribbean, Andes, Pacific, Orinoco, and the Amazon. Though the Amazon is the largest, it holds only 3% of the country's population. On that note, Colombia's population is also a very diverse group of people, largely due to its history. For the most part, it's a mixture of European, Amerindian, and Afro-Colombians. It only makes sense that regionalism plays a significant role in cultural life, with different people groups being dominant in different regions. Some are more Western-oriented, others have larger African roots, and then of course there's a small amount of indigenous people groups left. The Amazon region specifically has a large number of indigenous tribal people, many who speak their own language, and some that aren't even documented. Regarding indigenous tribes, we're going to talk about one in specific, the Muiscas. Unfortunately, them and their language, known as Chibcha, no longer exists due to Spanish colonization. However, they've left behind all sorts of a legacy. Organized in a confederation of union states, it was not an empire, and most tribes shared roots with each other as well as language. Irrigation and farming were understandably common, and gold was also in abundance in the region, making it common material for commodities. On that note, one of the most visited heritage sites in Colombia is the Gold Museum, or the Museo de Oro. This can be found in the capital Bogota, which opened in 1939. It showcases a large collection of gold pieces and artifacts that date back from the various time periods prior to Spanish colonization, some displaying technology from over 15,000 years. It's said to have begun with the single piece called Poporo Quimbaya, one with minimalistic lines that strangely give it a modern look. Now, we can't talk about the Muiscas without talking about Guatavita. Essentially, it's a massive basin of water located just northeast of Bogota, which was once considered a sacred ground, getting a green color from the sulfur. It actually used to be even deeper, but when the Spanish learned of the gold found at the bottom, they attempted to drain it, explaining the massive valley off to the side that you can actually see. The reason for the gold being there is because Muiscas believed in giving back to nature, meant to appease the sun god, so they would quite literally take gold and throw it into the middle of Guatavita. No swimming is allowed today, and the surrounding areas of trails are very well protected. In fact, they really don't even like when you touch the plants. Alright, so before we move on from this topic, we'll hit one more that's kind of related. The Salt Cathedral located in the city of Zipaquirá has a story that started with the Muiscas' discovery of the salt dome from a region once completely underwater, forming from the high salinity levels after it dried up. They began to use salt for trade and water evaporation, and eventually the Spanish started using explosives to dig deeper mines over the centuries, slowly turning it into a cathedral. You can visit this today with a guided walkthrough of all the sections depicting Christ's crucifixion, as well as the largest underground cross, considered the first wonder of Colombia. Alright, so now we'll take this opportunity to talk about some more religious sites. La Montserrat is a mountain range that runs along Bogota, and from just about anywhere in the city you can see the sanctuary that sits atop. Tourists will often pay to take a tram that takes you to the top quickly, but if you're like me, you can also go up for free just by walking along the trail. It is very tiring. It took me 2 hours. Once reaching the top, there are all sorts of beautiful shrines and displays, an active service, all sorts of restaurants and shops, and a beautiful view of the city. Which makes sense for me to talk about the elevation of Bogota. It is 8,600 feet above sea level, which makes it very difficult for people to do these types of climbing adventures if you're not used to that climate. Where I'm from, we're about 300 feet above sea level. Looking at another one, we have the Santuario Nuestra Señora del Carmen. This translates to the National Shrine of Our Lady Carmen. Built in 1938, it's characterized by its red and white stripes and architectural fusion of Florentine Gothic with Byzantine hints. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see the interior of this one because it was closed on the day that I went to go there, but apparently the decorations and just the way it looks is fantastic. Plazoleta Toro de Quevedo is often seen as the origin of Bogota, although that has been disputed. It's an old colonial square with some pubs, often accompanied by street vendors and artists. Most notably, it has the Hermitage of San Miguel de Príncipe, modeled off of the Humilladero Chapel, the first in Colombia. Ooh, that was rough. The water fountain was added in the 1800s, and surrounding this area is all sorts of preserved colonial streets, as well as buildings sporting professional artwork on the sides. Alright, so let's hit a few more things in Bogota before we move on from the capital. La Plaza de Boulevard, or Simon Bolivar Square, is more or less the center point of La Candelaria, which is the busiest and most touristy section of Bogota. There are food vendors everywhere, and of course there are people selling all sorts of souvenirs and services, and it's also a common place for street performances, events, and demonstrations. The streets surrounding it are lined with pubs and restaurants and places to stop and get a snack, and, like I said, street performers. I've noticed that Colombians seem to love US rock music. The buildings surrounding it include the Palace of Justice, the National Capitol Building, the primary cathedral of Bogota, and the Liévano Palace. These also all used to be the center point of what was the Muisca Confederation Center. If you don't get your fix from the street vendors, you might want to just relax and perhaps have a drink or some fresh fruits at what is called Mercado de la Concordia. Essentially, it's the market. Some of the outlets here have neat backstories, such as the one that directly supports remaining indigenous peoples of the land, or the one comprised of ex-FARC guerrilla members and descendants. Okay, who doesn't like a little culture? The national sport of Colombia is called tejo. Essentially, it's similar to the popular US sport cornhole, except you throw the heavy metallic disc called tejos at a board made of clay with packets of gunpowder. Landing it inside the circle of gunpowder will get you 6 points. Actually hitting one of the packets of gunpowder, which will make it, you get 3, and just simply sticking it into the mud, you get 1. First of 21 wins. Yes, I got to play this. It was loads of fun.
Mi amigo Anderson, we are playing tejo, the national game of Colombia.
Salsa dancing is pretty popular in Colombia, but because of the nation's massive size and all of the ethnic majorities, the music itself is quite diverse. Naturally, Amerindian, African, and European influences make their way in, including cumbia in the west, vallenato in the east, among others in the Pacific and Caribbean regions. Sugarcane is an important ingredient in a lot of Colombian drinks. One of my favorites is chicha, an alcoholic beverage made from fermented corn, sugarcane, and pineapple. Let me tell you, this stuff will hit you pretty hard if you're not careful. The national dish of Colombia is called bandeja paisa. It's a platter of red beans, pork, rice, fried egg, avocados, and all sorts of other toppings according to your preference. Tamales, empanadas, kebabs, and region-specific hot dogs topped with quail eggs, pineapple sauce, and potato crisps are also very common. Not enough, let's talk about the coca plant. Now I know what you're all thinking, but get your heads out of the gutter! It's actually a plant that's very good for you and can be used in tea or simply chewed, similar to what we might do with tobacco. It's said to boost the immune system and can give you energetic kicks without, turning it into a white powder. To nobody's surprise, coffee farming is very important to the economy of Colombia. Fun fact, receiving them unroasted, which gives off the greener look as opposed to the dark brown, is actually a sign of healthier beans. And let me tell you, drinking this straight is as bitter as you think it is. La Chorrera is the highest waterfall in Colombia, which is another incredible excursion worth taking despite how tiring it can be. Situated in an agricultural farmland area near another smaller waterfall known as El Chiflón. For those that like your wet climate hikes, this is definitely the one for you. So, if this wasn't obvious by now, there is a part of the Amazon that falls within Colombia. Some of the wildlife found out here include toucans, parrots, and sloths, but also the poison dart frog and puma, so enter at your own risk. The frailejon plant can be found in the entire Andes mountain range, and it is very important to Colombia. Its primary purpose is to serve for water conservation as it absorbs the mist and feeds feeds it through the roots in times of drought. And they only grow at 1 centimeter per year, so it's really important to not kill them if you're out in this area. In the eastern regions of Colombia, you can find capybaras in the wild. The Cano Cristales, or the Liquid Rainbow River, naturally sports all sorts of colors in this time of year that conditions are right. Found in an isolated mountain range in the Meta department, it's a tributary of the Guayabero River, founded in 1969 by a group of cattle farmers. Alright, let's dive back into some history. We will be returning to that aforementioned Simon Bolivar. Like much of these sections, this will be oversimplified, but I urge you to look deeper on some of these topics. Bolivar is an inspirational figure not only in Colombia, but pretty much all of Latin America. He would lead what was once known as Gran Colombia to independence from Spain. Gran Colombia was basically comprised of what is modern-day Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. Born to a wealthy family in the late 18th century, he would lead this movement up until the beginning of the building military and political structures in 1817, until eventually becoming supreme leader. He would die of tuberculosis in 1830 at the age of 47. Interestingly enough, following this revolution, Gran Colombia would split up into what is now Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. Yeah, I know, I said that twice. Very shortly after Bolivar's death, the collapse would start in 1831 due to political differences and regional tensions. That said, Panama didn't actually leave until 1903, with the help of the US, because, we wanted to build that whole canal thing. Throughout the 20th century, Colombia would face some serious hardships, which more or less led to the reputation it has amongst people today. The US-based United Fruit Company, owning so much of the farmland and using it as influence towards the government, caused all sorts of rebellion movements amongst the farmers. Moreover, this is about when the drug lords would start stepping in, because, as we know, that's a pretty lucrative business. Between government corruption, imperialist endeavors, drugs, and rebellions, you basically had all sorts of battles between those by the time we reached the latter part of the 20th century. That leads me to something that we must talk about called La Violencia. This is basically an uprising in 1948 following the assassination of the presidential candidate Jorge Eliezer Gaitan. It spawned a 10-year civil war that was mostly fought between liberals and conservatives, taking place largely on the countryside. So basically you had all sorts of peasant-on-peasant violence, and as a result of all of this after the war, farmers could now legally build little armies to protect land. Oh, and fun fact, the Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro was actually present in Bogota in 1948. He led a student group funded by the Argentine leader Juan Perón. The end of this would also see the breakaway of the aforementioned group known as FARC. Now, what is FARC? It's basically a guerrilla movement that stands for Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. This kind of sprung out of the aforementioned movement against the corrupt government, and while some people saw them as liberators, there was also all sorts of violence involved in this. Locals started to see them as more dangerous as they got more powerful, so, kind of one of them touchy subjects. Again, this is all a major oversimplification. They mostly reside at the aforementioned Darien Gap, so these days they don't really have much of any influence. And before we move on from these controversial things, I guess we'll talk about Pablo Escobar. Probably the most notorious drug lord, he was born and raised in Medellin, leading the cartel of that city. He established the first smuggling routes that eventually made it to the US, creating a demand that allowed for around 70 tons monthly to be imported. By the time of his death, his net worth was nearly 30 million US dollars. Alright, let's move our attention to some more cities. Only makes sense to start with Medellin, the second largest city behind the capital. It's located in the Antioquia region, founded in the 17th century, getting its name from a small village in Spain. Some things worth seeing here include the Metropolitan Cathedral of Medellin, the San Ignacio Church, and the Spain Library Park. Now, Medellin used to be one of the most dangerous cities in the world, but over the last couple of decades, homicide and poverty rates have dropped dramatically. You can now actually tour Comuna 13, which was once the most violent part, but now sports all sorts of street art as a result of former police raids and is far more vibrant these days. Comuna 8 will offer something similar, however it's less tourist dense and it may be a bit more authentic of an experience. Just outside of Medellin is Guatape, a small village known for El Peño, the granite monolith with many etched-in stairs. Climbing to the top apparently offers a breathtaking view of the entire region. Let's take a look at another city called Cali. Officially known as Santiago de Cali, it's located in the southwestern region and was founded in 1536 by Sebastian de Belalcazar, long after he arrived in South America on Christopher Columbus's third voyage. This, of course, meant fighting off the native Timbas, which did apparently put up a pretty hefty fight. Up until the late 18th century, what is now Cali was apparently only a small town. Today, Cali is a very vibrant city, known for its bohemian vibes, and it is also a very walkable one, being the most popular city for salsa dancing. Oh, and apparently you'll encounter scattered metal cats everywhere, including the 3-ton bronze one in Parque de la Retreta. There's also an orchid park, as the country is known for its massive variety of these. It's basically an open-air museum spanning about 3 acres through a wooden park. The Cali River runs right along the city as well as through some parts of it, flowing into the larger Cauca River. There's actually a social class system ranging from the numbers 0 to 6 in Colombia, which is largely based off of housing situations. Basically, the lower your number, the worse off you are, meaning people who are a 1 might not even have access to electricity or plumbing, where those at a 6 might be living in a mansion. Initially, this was a government system that was kind of meant to benefit the people so that the government knew who they needed to help more and who didn't need much help, although over the years, like many things, this has kind of been weaponized and people use it against each other and has created larger class divisions. Colombia is number 1 in the world when it comes to emerald exporting. Around 75% of the world's emeralds come from here, mostly because of its visually pleasing deep green color. There was actually an international emerald trade store right across the street from my hotel when I was there. Colombia has over 30 different exotic fruits. Some of these are the Curuba passion fruit, the guanabana, which is a very sweet pulp, and the sour araza. La Guajira is said to be an experience similar to, visiting the moon. Yes, this is a northeastern desert that is full of red rock formations and vast empty terrain, an isolated region that you can take a tour to. It is required by law for the national anthem of Colombia to be played on television and radio stations twice per day. South America's longest bicycle route can be found in Colombia, known as Outro de Letras. It's 300 kilometers long and apparently one of the most difficult bike climbs. Like I said, the elevation in certain parts of this country. In fact, there's apparently an 80-kilometer incline throughout the entire thing. The myth of El Dorado actually started as one of a man, not a city. He's said to have covered himself in gold every day and then washing it off in the lake every evening. That takes some origin in the Muisca ritual of offering up gold dust to the sacred lake if you're a contestant for being the tribe's new leader. And now there's a whole ass airport named after El Dorado. The yellow on the Colombian flag takes up half of the flag, which represents the gold found in the country. The red stands for the blood of those who fought for the nation, which is a very common feat on flags, and the blue stands for the blue skies and the rivers. Uber is actually illegal in Colombia, however this law is hardly ever enforced. And even if they do enforce it, drivers will often have you sit up front so that you can't really tell a difference anyway. Taxis are more common, however. I actually used both of them on my trip. One of my drivers actually FaceTimed his 8-year-old daughter so that she could talk to somebody from the United States, and man, it was so cute. The Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta has the world's largest coastal mountain, as well as the nation's highest peak, Mount Cristobal Colon, at 19,000 feet above sea level. And with that, we come to the end. After doing several topic country videos, it was kind of nice to just float back into the 50 facts format. Having been there, it sort of made sense because there was so much to talk about. Honestly, if there's anything I missed the most, is all the people I met on the way. Like, seriously, the people here were so kind. Everybody I encountered, well, almost everybody I encountered was very pleasant, and really, I wouldn't let a reputation of a country deter you from going there. Oh, and as you notice, I tried a different format. I am now standing for the video, so you now get 4 maps in the background. As always, thank you. I'm always open to feedback. Don't forget to subscribe, like, yada, yada, yada. Peace.